The first debt ceiling crisis occurred in 1953. And here we are, 47 plus 25. What's that? 72 years later, right? Yeah, 1953, something like that. 47 plus 25. Yeah, 72 years later, still dealing with debt ceiling. All right, so this is from New York Federal Reserve Board right here. The first debt ceiling crisis by this guy, Kenneth Garbade, who looks like he had written a nice book, an interesting book on federal the bonds issued by the Treasury. I want to buy from I'm not exactly sure what the book is, but it looks pretty good. I'm going to buy it. Or I'm going to try to download it as a PDF. All right, so this Federal Reserve Board, and this is written in 2016. Yeah, 2016. In the second half of 1953, the United States, for the first time, risked exceeding the statutory limit on debt. This paper describes how Congress, the White House, and Treasury dealt with a looming crisis. How'd they do that? Let's take a look here. In the second half of 1953, the U.S., for the first time, risked exceeding the statutory limit on debt. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Congress adopted the modern form of the debt ceiling in 1939 with a $45 billion limit. $45 billion limit on the aggregate outstanding amount. And I went to Grok, because I think Grok crushes, and I said, how much was the $45 billion in debt equal to today? That's about $1 trillion in debt. All right, so that'd be the equivalent of $1 trillion. Hi, puppy. And then I said, what is the GDP in 1939 relative to today? Let's take a look, shall we? Ask Grok. So the $45 billion in debt that we had in 1939 is the equivalent of about $1 trillion today in debt. And people are like, well, debt is so much higher. Yeah, but you know what the GDP was in 1939? The GDP in 1939 was $92 billion, which is the equivalent of $2.09 trillion. All right, so basically we had a 50% debt to GDP ratio back then. Now we got like a 115 or something like that. Our debt is about $35 trillion, and our GDP is, I think, 28, 29, maybe 30 trillion. I can't remember. But anyway, as you can see, the debt has gone up, the GDP has gone up, and yet here we are still. I can't believe I'm still alive. It's amazing. We've had debt forever. It never gets paid off. It will never be paid off. Stop this idea we got to pay down the debt. It's never going to happen, man. It's never going to happen. All right. So Congress adopted the debt ceiling in 1939. Yeah, we talked about that. They raised the debt ceiling, to a peak of $300 billion in World War II, then lowered it in 1946. All right. Let's take a look here. Beginning in 1951, Treasury debt began to rise, primarily because of the cost of the Korean War. That's not good. Check this out. But in June of 1953, Secretary of the Treasury, George Humphrey, testified before the House Ways and Means Committee that he expected to have to borrow $9 billion to $12 billion of new money by the end of the year. Treasury debt at that time was $266 billion, and officials and the debt ceiling was $275 billion. So old George here said he needed to borrow $9 to $12 billion, which would put us above the debt ceiling. Oh my goodness, the whole country's going to fall apart. Reaction was swift and sharp. Senator Harry Byrd, a prominent Democrat racist of Virginia, said he would do everything in his power to block an increase in the debt ceiling. The Wall Street Journal opined that to impose a limit on the government's debt and then to have it change the moment it needs to makes the whole thing a trick of fooling people. You think? And here we are today. We get a debt ceiling. Oh my goodness, we can't raise the debt. It's going to be horrible. The economy's going to fall apart. There'll be massive inflation, blah, 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 blah. It's just so stupid. It never happens. Doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means it never has. All right, let's see. On June 30th, 1953, one day before Congress planned to adjourn, President Eisenhower asked Congress to approve a $15 billion expansion of the debt limit to $290. The House approved the request almost by a 2-to-1 margin, but despite the testimony of Secretary Humphrey, the Senate Finance Committee pigeonholed the initiative. Congress adjourned without taking action, leaving the administration officials to manage the best they could. They did not raise the debt ceiling to 290 like Eisenhower wanted. So what are they going to do? The solution to the debt ceiling crisis came from the third option and involved a stock of almost $1 billion of free gold. That is gold coin and bullion in treasury vaults in which gold certificates had not been issued yet. The free gold was what remained of $2 billion that had been allocated previously. So we had $2 billion allocated, but we still had about $1 billion that hadn't been basically we hadn't put any debt against it yet. All right, gold was trading at 20. Well, basically it wasn't trading, but they basically valued gold at $20.67 an ounce, and they revalued it to $35 an ounce, essentially creating $500 million of free money. It's funny. And so what they did. Let's check this out. Oh my goodness, this cracks me up. On Monday, November 9th, the Treasury announced that it monetized $500 million of its free gold by issuing gold certificates against the gold and depositing the certificates with the Federal Reserve, and that it had used the resulting credits to repurchase directly from the system $500 million of Treasury notes. The action did not affect monetary policy and merely replaced one asset, the bonds, the debt, with another, the gold certificates, which allowed them to expand the debt ceiling. Because they didn't expand it, they reduced the amount of debts they had on the books, because they basically took the gold certificates. They were going to replace the bonds with these gold certificates. We have less debt outstanding. That means we're not up against the debt ceiling. The headroom available for additional Treasury debt issuance expanded gradually from $293 million at the end of November to $700 million by February 1954, and then jumped to $5.2 billion. It's all fake. In the spring of 1954, Treasury officials launched a renewed effort to raise the debt ceiling. The Wall Street Journal reported that officials expected the Treasury debt to reach $270 billion by the end of June before any of the $10 billion needed of automated debt had been issued, and they might be willing to accept alternatives to a straight dollar rise in the debt limit. Oh my goodness. Anyway, the August 1954 resolution of the debt ceiling was not expected to be a permanent fix. Eugene Milliken, who is the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, predicted that further review of the matter would be necessary, and as such, the debt would again rise, but it might be temporary. Yeah, temporary my behind. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting. And an end note. Oh, he talks about this right here. How Fannie Mae came to issue debt directly to investors. At about this time, Congress was debating an increase in the debt ceiling. It was also putting the finishing touches on the Housing Act of 1954. Among other things, the act authorized the Federal National Mortgage Association, Fannie Mae, to issue debt to private investors, and provided that Fannie Mae shall insert appropriate language in all of its obligations under the subsection clearly indicating that such obligations are not guaranteed by the United States. So that meant it could avoid pushing the Treasury's debt towards the ceiling. We just say these aren't guaranteed by us. These are just, if you're investing in Fannie Mae, buyer beware, but these do not issue debt against our debt ceiling, even though it's debt coming from the government, because it's Fannie Mae who was authorized to issue the debt. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I just find it funny because all these, this is the Birth of a Market. Is Kenneth Garbade from 2012 had written this book called Birth of a Market. I want to read that book. It looks pretty interesting to me about government bonds and whatnot. So very much, hey, Anna Schwartz. Hey, from obscurity to notoriety, biography of the Exchange Stabilization Fund. That sounds painful to me. But Anna Schwartz, y'all knew it. If you know who Anna Schwartz is, put in the show notes. If you know who Anna Schwartz is, you're a legend. Anyway, this whole thing about the debt, dude, stop it. Stop it. It's the boy who cried wolf, man. I mean, it's been going up since 1939. We've been pushing up against the debt ceiling. Do you know, by the way, our debt to GDP in the 1930s and the 1890s was less than 10%. I posted this on X today, as a matter of fact. So if you're not following me on X, you need to. My handle, is that what they say on X? I don't know, because I'm not. Because I like the ladies. But Scanlon Josh. Just look for my last name, Scanlon Josh. Anyway, in 1890, the debt to GDP ratio was less than 10%, and the economy sucked. All right. In 1970, the debt to GDP ratio was less than 30% under Nixon and Carter, and the economy sucked. So when we have everyone griping about the debt to GDP ratio being over 100%, the evidence doesn't mean the economy is going to suck donkey balls. It's just not there, man. I mean, it could. Again, I always got to qualify this. Say, that doesn't mean it can't be a problem, but it hasn't. The debt to GDP in the 1890s was low. The debt to GDP in the 1970s was low when the economy was sucking wind. And the debt to GDP has been growing ever since, dude. And the economy isn't sucking wind. It's just not. I mean, it's not great, We need tariffs, absolutely, to get our manufacturing back, especially steel manufacturing. But just stop with the negative stuff, man. It's just it's boring. It really is. All right, God bless. Smash that like button. We'll see you. If I can find how to turn this off. I got this beautiful sunshine. My beautiful